The United Football League has some really exciting rule changes. 60-plus yard field goals are now worth 4 points. There's no more tush push. You can go for a 3-point conversion, and there's even new overtime rules that are more similar to that of college football. And putting all of these experimental rules on tape really has created a relationship between the UFL and the NFL that mirrors that of minor and Major League Baseball. So what if we just went further in that direction of using the UFL as a developmental league? See, when the UFL broke down their new rule changes on their YouTube channel, VP of Officiating Dean Blandino actually called the league a testing lab for the future of football, which not only presents them, at least unofficially, as a research and development department for the NFL, but also showcases an understanding, at least among some people in the league, that fans likely view them as an inferior product, understanding that they're not necessarily going to take away viewership from the NFL and outright compete with them, but instead potentially work on something that's mutually beneficial and can find sustainability for the United Football League. And there is an interesting intersection here between that theoretical mindset with the pipeline of players that have already entered the NFL from the United Football League and those unique rule changes that, when you combine all three of those factors together, do provide an outlook that is eerily similar to what the MLB has with minor league baseball. See, I look at the most publicized rule change, the 60-plus yard field goals now being worth 4 points, and I combine that with the recent string of success of a certain position of player entering the NFL from the United Football League, using it in the way that I have described as a developmental league to get more on tape and further their games. And I realize that maybe, just maybe, the UFL has used this rule change not necessarily just as an experiment for the NFL, but rather a way to showcase their best talent and further the progression of these players. And if you haven't caught on, the position that I'm talking about right now is kicker. Some of the best kickers in the NFL actually came through the United Football League before being on their current teams. Brandon Aubrey, the best kicker in the sport, started off playing professional soccer, switched over to football in the USFL, which is now the UFL, and later on got signed by Dallas after putting a bunch of great kicks on tape. Another player in Jake Bates has the longest field goal in UFL history at 64 yards, and now he's a consistent contributor for the Detroit Lions. And there are other contributors as well, like Andre Schmidt in Cleveland. Harrison Mevis got picked up this year by the Rams. And keep in mind, the UFL acknowledges this specifically. They have a UFL to NFL page where you can see players who have made the transition within the past year. And in that same video I talked about with Dean Blandino, they specifically reference some of those players making the jump from the UFL to the NFL and now their sustained success in football. So after acknowledging this, I think the UFL is taking the obvious step forward, seeing that the NFL benefits greatly from their kicker development on top of the fact that it has increased publicity for the league. It makes sense to incentivize kicker play within your sport, which is why that rule, the 60-yard field goals being worth 4 points, seems like it's at least partially an effort to get more of those great kicks on tape to further what I just spoke about. Now, this next part is just conjecture, a proposal about how we can move this forward, because I personally want to see this for other positions. Long gone are the days where Jim Kelly, Warren Moon, and Cameron Wake are coming from these other leagues and tearing up the NFL. And I think it would be really cool to see that, especially in an era where you look and see the greatest quarterback of all time talking about how quarterback is more underdeveloped now than it ever has been. So here's a proposal that I think could work depending on the mindset of the investors in the UFL. If they truly believe that at some point this is going to compete with the NFL for national TV audiences and they want to go toe-to-toe with them, then I understand why you wouldn't pick this. But if you really do think that the path forward for the United Football League is as a true subsidiary of the NFL and that's your path to sustainability, then I think this is a good idea. How about when a player makes the transition from the UFL to the NFL either matches that salary or puts some sort of money into the UFL to invest in their player pool to give them more spending power to get higher level talent and coaches so that they can develop them and continue the pipeline of talent to the NFL. Because money is the obvious barrier to entry for the UFL getting top flight talent or even reclamation talent that isn't playing in the NFL. A minimum contract in the NFL is more than 10 times that in the UFL, which means that players would rather stick around and not play than go perform in a lesser league, even if it's better for their development. We're kind of seeing this right now with NIL, where some of the opportunities would be best sticking around at your current school or potentially going to the league and getting under the microscope of these NFL coaches, but they'd rather move where they can get the most immediate money and set themselves up for the future. So the idea here is to create this mutualist system where the UFL develops talent and the NFL pays for it, furthering this feedback loop of better development and better players entering the lower leagues, creating a hierarchy so that they can make that jump from the UFL to the NFL. But in that obviously lies a few problems. This would totally advance the monopoly of the NFL, and I understand if there are investors in the UFL, they wouldn't want to completely bow down to somebody that they potentially view as competition. I also don't think we're at a point with a lack of parity or competition in the NFL where this is something that would be a number one need and necessity, and it would be another outflow of money, and you wouldn't be sure how much money it would bring in for the NFL. And lastly, this one's kind of a hypothetical, but what kind of value does untapped potential hold for the NFL? Does it make more sense for them to keep some of these under-repped players in-house so that they can stir up conversation and publicity for the league? I think of a player like Trey Lance or Anthony Richardson, historically under-repped guys. Does it make more sense to keep those guys from realizing their full potential and keep them as backups to stir up conversation, to say, hey, does Anthony Richardson deserve to be a starter somewhere, rather than having him do it in another league and potentially not realize that potential? It's something that I actually struggle with trying to weigh in terms of the NFL's values, because obviously they want more talent in their league, but at the same time, they're not bereft of it. There aren't these large-scale conversations going on about how football is a bad product in the same way that you potentially hear about basketball. And on top of that, you're stirring up more conversation by having these guys never really showcasing their skills. It's potentially bad for the players to keep them on these rosters, at least in terms of their development, but at the same time, it seems like it's really good for drumming up some sort of engagement. I hope you guys understood the point that I was trying to get out there, and overall, I hope you enjoyed this video. That is one idea for some path of sustainability for the UFL, specifically as a subsidiary of the NFL, because I didn't get to grow up in the era where all of these great players were coming from other leagues to go play professional football at the NFL level, and I have heard a lot of the concerns about player development. And I think it's really cool to have multiple different football leagues, especially one going on in the spring. I know I'll be watching the UFL, and as an NFL fan, I'll definitely be covering that as well. And all of that will be right here on this YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed, and comment what you want to see next.